Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. Welcome to Week 7 of Capitol Outlook. The 64th Wyoming Legislature is racing to the finish line in this 40-day general session, and there are still many moving parts with two major issues: education and the supplemental budget. We'll begin tonight with Representative Gary Pieperinen and Representative Mark Kinner, both members of the House Education Committee. Both lawmakers initially opposed the Education Finance Bill, House Bill 236, but for different reasons. Now, that House bill, many believe, has the best chance to make its way to Governor Matt Mead's desk as Wyoming begins to deal with education funding shortfalls. Next, the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature will share their views on the big differences between the House and Senate versions of the supplemental budget bill now making its way through a budget conference committee. We'll also profile the Speaker of the House, Representative Steve Harshman, and continue our tradition of meeting new members of the Wyoming Legislature. From Cheyenne, Capitol Outlook begins now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And welcome to our viewers. It's Capitol Outlook Week 7, and we're going to start this discussion, like so many of our discussions have been, with education. Two members of the House Education Committee are joining us today, Representative Gary Pieperinen from Evanston.
Good morning.
And Representative Mark Kinner from Sheridan. Gentlemen, welcome to Capitol Outlook.
Thank you. Good morning.
There's been a lot of spinning wheels with education. You both initially voted no, and this is where I'd like to begin the conversation, to the House Omnibus funding bill that is now making its way to the Senate, and that some people believe might be what comes out of this legislature to begin to solve the estimated $400 million in the next biennium funding shortfall for education. But you both initially voted against that bill for different reasons. And Representative Pieperinen, let me visit with you first. Why the no vote initially on House Bill 236?
Well, the initial portion was when the JAC came into our committee room and asked if we wanted to sponsor this bill, which nobody had heard. And they immediately sat down. You know, they were the crafters of the bill, and they quickly went through it faster than one could keep up. And they said, "There it is. Would you like to sponsor it?" And I'm just sitting there with my mouth down, just, wow, that's a lot to take in. And I was the only one actually in that initial, whether we were going to sponsor it, that said, no, I had no input into this. This is your bill. You know, this is your painting. You sign it, not me.
Representative Kinner, you also had concerns about the bill initially, but maybe for different reasons.
Well, I did, and quite honestly, I'm going to go back just a step, if I might. I did serve on the small committee that worked on and actually produced the white paper around Christmas time.
This was a document that talked about some options to attack the funding shortfall for education, both on the cut side and the revenue side.
Right.
Continue on.
Exactly, and so I had a little more familiarity with that work and had focused a lot of time and effort on that. And so when that was presented and pulled together by the chairman of the Education Committee and some others, I had a little more comfort level, quite honestly, than Gary did with that. But now, the one thing that I had a problem with in committee was when the committee voted to add 2%.
And this is the House Education Committee.
Yes.
When you were first considering the bill.
Right, exactly. And I felt comfortable with the half a penny that would be implemented down the road when the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account got down to $500 million. I was okay with that. But then when that was changed and morphed into a 2% tax, almost beginning immediately, I really had some concerns about that because that really hadn't been vetted at all. And so that was the reason I voted against it in the committee, even though I really wanted the bulk of the bill.
And this is a 2% sales tax.
Yes.
And a half-cent sales tax.
Yes, exactly.
That's being talked about. This bill is now progressing. It's over in the Senate. We all were at the Senate Education Committee when they considered the House bill. In a small room, I might add.
Very small room.
Representative Piperino, what are your thoughts now about the committee hearing that we watched and how that bill is now progressing?
Well, again, when I walked in, I kind of said out loud, I can't believe this, that we're in this small room. And it came to me that it's just very emblematic how a lot of this has been rolled out here, leaving those stakeholders out. There were a lot of people outside the room, just leaning up against a wall they couldn't hear. They weren't using their microphones very well. If there were microphones, I don't think there were.
I don't believe there were.
I mean, I got my way through, and I was right in back of Senator Rothfuss, who's on the committee, right by the desk, and I struggled to hear them. And again, I think that's just very emblematic, the way they treat some of the stakeholders. That should have been in the larger room. There should have been mics, and people should have been able to hear and weigh what they were hearing, but many were left out.
That said, it's still progressing. You're now much more familiar with the bill. Do you like it? Are you at that point where you could now support it?
Well, you know, it was interesting. When all this started out, I had a lot of my educators from my district saying, you know, kill 236. It's a bad bill. It's going to gut education. And to some extent, that's true. But it's interesting now, as other bills have come forward, what was the enemy now, they want to embrace that. They said, we want 236.
Is that your perception, Representative Kinner?
You know, initially, the districts in my area, maybe not 100%, but we're in favor of 236. And I think Gary's right in that some people perceive that as maybe one of the bad ways to tackle the education funding, issues. Now all of a sudden is certainly better than some of the other options out there, and I think has now received some support because of that.
One of those options that we're going to visit with Speaker Harshman and President Bebout is this $91 million cut to education that's been attached to the budget bill, and we'll visit with them here in an upcoming segment on this week's Capital Outlook. But Representative Kinner, I want to ask you, you're on the House Revenue Committee. Right. Revenue, most people believe, needs to be part of this discussion, and you were there when Senator Rothfuss made a motion to add a 1 cent sales tax, a half cent for the operations side of school funding, and less discussed, a half cent to the capital construction major maintenance problem that schools are now facing. That piggy bank is almost empty. And Senator Pappas argued, I thought, somewhat effectively on the need to really consider the capital construction major maintenance part of this problem right now. What were you thinking when that motion was made that was ultimately defeated in a tie vote?
Well, quite honestly, I was a little bit surprised that they even brought that up. Senator Rothfuss felt like the half a penny could be used for school funding, and that the other penny could be used for the major maintenance issue, which we know is out there, and we know is maybe the elephant in the room, but quite honestly, something that we need to deal with. And I think our feeling was that we would, or Senator Rothfuss's feeling was, let's address both now. And I think that was maybe a little bit premature, and of course it was voted down in the committee itself, but perhaps just maybe a little bit too much too fast for the liking of those senators.
And you also listened to the discussion, Representative Piperino, and again, many people say someday the revenue side has to be talked about. Is it still too early?
It was too early, very premature. You know, I think one thing we need to look at more so, and I still don't hear this discussion going on, is that the state of Wyoming needs to look at the way they do business. We just can't tax our way out of things here. I think we pay way too much to build the schools. You know, we're getting an architectural plan for each school here and that stuff. I've seen schools that have been, 75, 80 million, much more than we need to be paying for schools. We need to be looking at the way we do business rather than how do we get out of this hole. And I think they'll work together for Wyoming's good.
Let's talk about the interim, which is the period of time after this session ends before the budget session will begin in February of 2018. You're on the Revenue Committee, Representative Kinner, and yesterday in the House, a bill to study Wyoming's revenue requirements was voted down. What are your priorities here in the interim?
Well, certainly I think that was something that the House has resisted for some time now is creation of additional committees. You know, we already have the revenue committees. I think the feeling was let the revenue committees, the joint committee of both the Senate and the House, take up that revenue issue, and there's no need to create a new committee and try to come up with some additional funding at this time. And so the one part about that I did like was that the leadership in both houses would have taken part in that. And so in the interim committee, of course, the two leaders are not involved, although they would probably stay focused, and they could certainly attend the meetings, but not be the actual focus of the work.
Real quickly, what should the governor's role be in talking about maybe changing Wyoming's tax structure, changing Wyoming's revenue structure? What should his role be in this interim in the committee's view?
Well, I think his role should be to continue to work with the leaders of both houses, to continue to strategize with them and to talk about the possibilities and work collaboratively with both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. I think I would like to see that role played.
So you believe that's the top priority then for you this interim, is to have a revenue discussion with the state of Wyoming?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly an opportunity for folks to weigh in. You know, during the campaign, the last campaign season, that was an issue. I don't think there were any of us that were really in favor of raising taxes. We know that at some point we have to consider that, but I think that we need to convince the people of Wyoming that we've done, first, a good job of cutting the cost of government to the extent that we can without affecting services, but cut reasonably well. And then once we've completed that task, then we can go to the people of Wyoming and say, okay, now we've made those cuts, now we'd like to discuss revenue.
So are we at that point, in your eyes?
In my eyes, I think we really are, especially on the education side. We're hearing from so many people that please don't cut education any further. We know we'll have to, and the House Bill 236 will certainly address that, and we'll see what form that takes. But I believe in my own mind that we are at that point where we need to have that discussion.
Representative Piperinen, what is your priority for the upcoming interim?
Well, you know, if I can just take off of Mark's here, I'd like to see the governor get more involved and bring these houses together. I don't feel we're working as a cohesive unit to solve education's problems. I feel it's like sandbox play. Senate's over there and we're over here, we're not talking. I'd like to see that the governor kind of bring us together a little more. Again, I'd like the state to relook at the way they do business. You know, I feel this education problem has been put solely on education. And I think we could have looked more in the general fund. You know, we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on capital construction, and we're still putting money into that here. I think we need to look at maybe not building some of those buildings.
And this, just for some of our viewers, you're not talking specifically about the construction of the Capitol. I just want to make that clear. You're talking about other construction projects in Wyoming.
There's a lot of capital construction that the legislature passed, and after we passed some of those things, of which I was not part, but then the governor came out with his cuts, we should have looked at that capital construction before the governor had to do that. I think that forced him to do it. We build too many buildings.
Gentlemen, we have about a minute left in this segment. Are we going to finish what we need to finish in this session in regards to budget and education and perhaps any other issues that are on your radar? I'll let you go first, Representative Kinner.
You know, I don't know that we're going to be totally complete when we end the session, honestly. I think we will have made some progress and hopefully have us on the right track, but I don't believe we'll come up with any total final resolutions. Even the education funding that we're talking about is really only an interim kind of a solution. We need long-term discussions to continue.
Representative Piperinen, you have the last word.
I think it's a horse race, and there's about 4 or 5 horses coming down the stretch. Any one of them could win it, or they could all fall.
That would be a surprise. We'll see what happens. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Capital Outlook. It's week 7. This will be an exciting week here at the Wyoming Legislature. I'm not sure if exciting is the right word or not, but there's a lot of moving parts, and thank you for joining in the discussion.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
You bet. Up next now is our weekly conversation with the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature. President of the Senate, Eli Bebout, and the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman. They're next. Stay with us. We're now pleased to be joined by the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature, Senate President Eli Bebout and Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman. Gentlemen, welcome back to Capitol Outlook.
Good morning. Hey, thanks for having us.
Still a lot of moving parts. We're at week 7 now
Say that again.
Week 7.
I know.
And with a little bit of time left, with a lot left to do. And certainly there are 2 major issues that are still out there. And I want to start with the budget. There is a conference committee now that is negotiating its way to try to get to some sort of agreement with the supplemental budget. And there are 2 major sticking points. One is the $91 million cut to education, and the other is the 2% cut to state employees. And it seems to me that that is where this body is, your 2 bodies are relatively far apart. What is your perception of the budget negotiation process so far, Mr. President? Let me start with you.
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think those are the 2 big issues. A lot of this should have been done a week or so ago, but the House has got a lot of new members and a lot of debate going on where we're way behind schedule. I would have hoped that these decisions would have been made, but they're not, and they're still working. And I think those are the 2 big important parts. The Senate is very firm, and we think we should have responsible reductions in education. The rest of the state has taken big hits. I looked at the Riverton Ranger last week. The county commissioners are talking additional 10% cut, and on the other side of the paper was education doesn't believe they can do with 2 or 3 or 4% cuts. So it's a big issue. The Senate is very firm on wanting cuts, and we're also very firm on no tax increases. So, but the process will work. We'll see what happens. I'm optimistic. They're going to meet again today, and I think we'll get through this thing and come out with a product that probably neither one of us likes, but might move forward and try to get the process started on education. We have to make the reductions, but we don't want to raise taxes now, but we need to start that process, and I'm optimistic we'll get there.
Mr. Speaker, there's a House Education Omnibus Funding Bill that does make cuts to education. Is that enough, in your opinion?
Well, I think, again, that bill's a long ways from the finish line. I think everybody realizes there's going to be cuts. I mean, the issue is too big to tax and it's too big to cut. So it's going to be a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach. And that's what I think the House and many Senate members, in fact, have worked hard on. And so how do you get there? I mean, that's the process. 3 readings in the House and committee work, and now it's committee work, 3 readings in the Senate, and it'll come out and go to conference committee, and you'll work on those differences. That's our process. It's a tough process. That's the way our founders set it up. And so I think the issue, though, is going to be, education's a little different. It's different than other segments of government. First of all, it's more dependent on minerals than any other segment we have. There's no doubt about that. And then secondly, it's a cost-based model. So we've gone out and studied the costs and what it takes to run these schools across Wyoming. And then the third part of that deal is, how do you make those reductions? And I think everybody has said, every school district I've talked to said, we're willing to do our part, just don't make us jump off the cliff. Let us know the 3-4 year plan and let us phase those in and give us time to adjust the organization.
So, Mr. Speaker, in this conference committee, the House seems to me to be digging its heels in and saying that a $91 million cut to education is too much now. Is that your position?
Well, yeah, I think absolutely. And I think even the Senate, and I won't speak for them, but what they said in the paper was it was a bargaining chip. And so we'll bargain with that and we'll work with it. That's what we do with these things. But there's a lot of moving parts, as you said. So you got House Bill 236, you've got House Bill Senate File 1, and then you've got fee bills out there too that are that our JAC worked very hard on. Those are all part of this whole budget balancing piece as well. And so all those things will come together. There's groups working independently on all that, and the Senate still has the fee bills, and they have House Bill 236. But I think it's like all legislative sessions. It comes down to the last week. There'll be conference committees buzzing around trying to pull it all together, and then we'll finish up.
Mr. President, we talked about these fee bills with the JAC leadership in a few episodes ago on Capitol Outlook. What is your thought about that? You've been really firm that you don't want any new taxes. But this idea is to maybe make it a little more expensive to buy a deer license, to get a driver's license in Wyoming, and to charge more appropriate fees to offset some of these costs. Are you supporting those fee bills?
Right now, the timing is not good for that fee increase bills. it's a tax increase is what it is. However, if we do have a budget bill, and I'm not sure we will have a budget bill because the Senate is very firm in our positions, and if there's no budget bill, then there's no budget bill. If there's no budget bill, there's no fee bills. So it's all going to come to a head in the next 6 or 7 days, and we'll see what happens with the JAC and the conference committee. If they work something out that the Senate can agree to, it's going to be very difficult for me to go to the floor of the Senate with the JAC and convince them to do something less than they wanted. And they really were firm on the $96 million, the $91 million reductions. They also agree with phasing it in. You know, the Senate was votes like 23-7, 22-8, 25-5, very strong in our position. So we need to have a good compromise, but it's going to be very hard to convince the Senate that if we compromise too far. So there's a delicate balance there. If we do have a budget bill, and I do hope that we have a budget bill, then the fee bills will come up. I can't tell you how the Senate will react. It's going to be interesting.
But your thoughts, Mr. President, on those fee bills? Is it something that you would support? You're not.
I'm not enthused about them, but I'll look at the compromise we come up with. You know, the approach the JAC took was a reasonable one, and how they came to that resolution. I would have rather seen more responsible reductions rather than have the fee increase bill, but that's not where we are today, so we have to deal with it in a manner that was presented to us today.
Mr. Speaker, this conference group is considering a supplemental budget bill. What are the ramifications if this bill doesn't pass?
Well, I think the biggest ramification is that the work that the Appropriations Committee did a year ago, the work that the JAC has done now,
and this bill, by the way, includes tens of millions of dollars of cuts.
And the cuts that the governor made last July, those are all kind of ratified, if you will, in this bill. And so if this bill does not go forward, I mean, we have a 2-year budget in Wyoming. All that's budgeted, but revenues come back, those kind of things come back. The governor can institute, reinstitute the spending that was in those spots. And then there are some policy things that are important, I think, in the budget bill. Will any of it shut down the state if it doesn't pass? No. I don't think that an average Wyomingite will know whether it passed or not. But I think the most important part of it really sets us up for our next budget. The governor has to come back with a budget proposal next December 1st. And depending on our work in the next 6-7 days, that's going to really determine, the scope of his work, I think.
Well, and the other thing too is, if we can't get together on a reasonable compromise between the House and the Senate, that will only be exacerbated when we come back, and the Senate is going to be even more resistant to any kind of tax increase if we can't do something now. So it's really important we get something going the next week.
Let's move on. There's been a lot of good work done outside of education and budget, although that has really monopolized a lot of our conversation. Give us a report so far in the work that that you're most proud about and is advancing forward. Mr. Speaker, let me start with you.
Well, I think there's been a whole suite of couple things, really, economic development bills and what I call young people bills. And so I think on the economic development.
Are we involved in the young people bills here?
Well, no,
We're not?
Younger people than us.
Darn it.
Yeah, I guess that is all a frame of reference, I guess. But young at heart, I guess.
There you go.
So I think, things that folks don't, the public purpose investments is a key part of what the folks who set up the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund in the 1970s, investing back in our Wyoming communities with part of our permanent savings. There's a bill working its way through the Senate to increase that amount and that threshold. We've passed a bill in the House and the Senate. I think will receive consideration on what we call the Amendment 4, the large project. And we always have these debates, whether you're Smith or Kinsey in economics or somewhere in between. And we think government plays a role, no doubt. And I think that the chicken or the egg, what comes first, development or people or development, and those kind of things. And so we're trying to do our part. We've had a lot of success in the past with that, so that bill's working through. The governor's endow bill that the senators worked through the Senate is now in the House, and we're actually have that on committee of the whole today. And then I'd say these young people bills, we're trying to continue, and the university has asked for the support on this as well, but to offer residents of Colorado and Nebraska a reduced tuition rate instead of the full out-of-state tuition. We used to have 800 kids from Nebraska at our university. This semester we have 80. And
Not as much red though in the stands during the Wyoming-Nebraska game, maybe.
exactly. But and then I think you know there's a lot of this competition for top kids is really intense out there. And now we have a bill for Wyoming to get into that competition. Everybody's coming in and poaching our kids, pulling them out of state, taking them to their universities in other states, and they never come back because they marry a local person, they stay there, and they build their life and that state's economy. And we're going to try to get in the game to reverse that a little bit.
That's why I came back to Wyoming. I think that's why the speaker came back to Wyoming. When we got out of college, there weren't any jobs here, and so we had to go where there were jobs, and then we just couldn't wait to come back to Wyoming. The thing that we talked about 7 weeks ago was the agenda that we had worked on, working for Wyoming. And we haven't lost track of that. The legislature hasn't, the speaker hasn't, I as president have not lost track of that. We're just being dominated by education, and it's an important issue, but we can't lose track of big important things that are going on besides education. And we need to look at economic diversification. We need to broaden our tax base. I was disappointed to see a revenue study bill died in the House yesterday. That's too bad. You know, we have a lot of good things going on, and we need to continue to have that optimistic attitude. Out of adversity comes opportunities, and we've got great opportunities. So I'm really hopeful that we can pull some of these things together towards this last week and get back on track, working for Wyoming, doing good things, to look to the future, be proactive rather than reactive. That's what it's all about. And when I talk to my constituents, what's your plan? What are we going to do? How do we create jobs for these young people? The opportunities are there. We need to move now.
Let's end today with looking at the future, looking at the interim. If I were to ask you now what your top couple priorities are for the interim, what would you tell me?
Well, I think our Minerals Business Economic Development Committees, I'm really interested that they form this partnership with our federal partners that works. 67% of our minerals are federally owned. We hope with a new administration, but we want to really expedite that to really open up and have multiple use of our land. Because Wyoming is half the landowner when those minerals are produced. It is really a foundation to funding our schools and many of the functions in our state. So I think that's really going to be key.
President,
we can't get away from minerals. And the speaker's right. It's such a huge part of our revenue stream, but the good jobs it creates for Wyoming. We need to really work on that. We need to have responsible development of those minerals, which means multiple use and access to public lands, a big issue. You know, we also need to add value to those minerals and create those kind of jobs. We need to look at petrochemical plants, nuclear, all these different things that are out there, opportunities for Wyoming to create good jobs, tax revenues. So to me, it would be the continued efforts we're making on economic development, diversity, working with our minerals, and it's tourism, it's ag, it's all of the above. And we're going to have to deal with education. It's going to be a big part of what we deal with, and that's going to be there. We'll see what happens with the budget bill. You know, the state, I think, bottomed out right now. I'm optimistic about how we turn this thing around. And we've laid the groundwork. You know, we've got the money there, we've got the attitude there. Everything's in place for us to do the right thing. It's just a matter of us executing, and I think we will.
You know, and I think another area, too, that is, I think Wyoming is ripe for, really, and it's really occurred in the last 10 years where we've updated our banking, our trusts, and our security laws. And Wyoming, and particularly, you know, you have Jackson and you have areas where Wyoming, I think, is really ripe. Why does South Dakota have all the banking and all the trust activity in South Dakota, and why not Wyoming? We have really better laws, and I think that's starting to be seen by folks on the national and international scale. I think that's another area with good paying jobs you're going to see a growth area in Wyoming in the future, and so excited about that as well.
You know, and Wyoming is consistently ranked #1 in the country for our conservative fiscal policies. That's a big, important thing for businesses to come to our state. And in terms of a place to do business, we're consistently in the top 10. It's all in place. We just need to get on board, execute, and deliver.
Well, 1 week from now, gentlemen, we'll look back and reflect, more likely than not, about what's happened here in the last...
You got your predictions where we're going to end up?
I'm going to ask you that question here. And I think there's a lot of balls in the air. I'm not sure where they're all going to land. So it's been a pleasure to visit with you both again. We'll look forward to our Week 8 conversation next week on Capital Outlook. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Mr. Speaker, we had a chance to sit down with you earlier in the session. We did a Capital Outlook profile with you, and we appreciate that. We want to show that to our viewers right now, and then ask you to stick around just for a little bit to reflect on that.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Speaker of the House Steve Harshman, thank you for joining us on this Capital Outlook profile.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, you've served since 2003, the citizens of House District 37 in Casper.
Right.
And I'm wondering, when you were banging pads around when you were a student at Black Hills State, if you thought of yourself in this kind of position.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't think any of us probably have those kind of plans. At least I didn't. But I was as a kid probably a total geopolitical history nerd. I mean, I was a storehouse for useless knowledge. I think I knew every leader in every country in the world in the 70s, and so I was a student council kid in high school and even in college as an association of students involved in that thing. So I've always loved that process.
A Midwest Oiler?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Wyoming native. So yeah, proud native of this great state.
So when you were in college in Black Hills, you became an education major. Tell me how that entered into your life.
Well, I like a lot of young people, I think the average person in college probably changes their major 3 times, and I don't know that I even was for sure exactly, but I had kind of settled on. I wanted to, my love of history and kind of government and those kind of things. I was a composite social studies major, so you took all the social sciences, and my plan at that time was to take the Foreign Service test and work for the State Department and kind of pursue that route. And then actually, I was playing college football. I played 4 years of college football there at Black Hills and wrestled actually a couple of years too. But I coached a summer football camp that our coaches, I was just a student assistant and just really kind of got the bug being around kids and doing that. And so I stayed really an extra year and added, another major and all the education requirements and those things, and kind of just kept working on it. And I think, it's the way it works. God has a plan.
So was there a time when you were thinking, well, where am I going to teach now? Where am I going to coach? And you landed back in Casper.
Yeah, I think so I graduated, I think, was it May of '86, I think, at Black Hills, and I started graduate school in June at Oregon State. So moved to Oregon and had a graduate assistantship at Western Oregon, which was real close to Corvallis, and they kind of had a joint school of education. And so
a graduate assistant means you were like an assistant football coach.
Assistant football coach, and so it was, learned a lot. You're young and you're just working and learning, and so that was really great. Did that for 2 years. Actually, had started my doctorate, kind of had gotten into the whole thing, and had a change of coaches. And when you work for a coach, I mean, that's who you work for. And when they leave, then it was time for me to find another job. And so that was kind of a crossroads. So I was offered a job in the western slope of Colorado, in a town, Delta, Colorado. So I was married my second year actually out there. And so my wife and I, Becky, we moved to Colorado. So, and we're there for 3 years. And then our first child was born there, Sarah. And so, my parents are in Casper, and Becky's parents are in Spearfish, so it was an opportunity, I think, to get back a little closer. Your kids kind of grow up knowing their grandparents, and that was really our motivation. And then, the job at Natrona County High School opened up, and I was 27 years old then, and, geez, I mean, to teach and coach in Natrona County High School, I just thought, wow.
Many people thought that Rosie Berger would become Speaker of the House. That didn't work out. How did that fall into your lap?
Right. I think, I think probably every legislator thinks, well, should I run for leadership? Because you have 60 leaders in the House. I mean, people who generally are there because they care and they want to make a difference and lead and those kind of things. And so I think, but I hadn't, that wasn't something I was really pursuing. And Rosie and I were both members of the 57th. We were elected at the same time and started serving in 2003, and I was prepared to support her. But I think, that's the way this works. I mean, voters make those decisions every 2 years in the House, and she had done a great job. And then with Tim Stubson, who chose to run for Congress, wasn't coming back. There was this void. And really, I think, serving on appropriations, you're involved in all the leadership meetings, you're working that process. And so I think just my experience, I think my colleagues trusted me enough to really to elect me to this office. So I'm grateful for their trust.
How did you approach it? Is it's like you're a coach almost, and you have to now lead this group of legislators?
Well, it is. I think, it's all about, there's a process to this, and we all have bringing people along, and it's all, in the end, I think this legislative process, it's like any team, you have to subject your own personal will to the wisdom of the group. And that's the way the process works. And even you might say, this is your bill and you put your name on it, but it's going to get changed in the process, and it's going to take teamwork to pass it. It takes 31 votes at least in the House, and then the process similar to that in the Senate. And so, so the will and the wisdom, I would say, the group genius is what I call it, because none of us have the answer, and it's like any kind of group working together. Pretty soon the best ideas boil to the top, and the rest of them are gently discarded, and they'll probably come back another day.
You've had an opportunity now, we're filming this in Cheyenne. We had an opportunity to do profiles before the session. We're visiting with you now mid-session. Any surprises? You're certainly in a time that is different fiscally than this state has been in for a couple generations. What's been the most difficult task that you've had as leader?
Well, I think, and we have a third of our body in the House is new, and frankly, a pretty good percentage that's, just in their second term as well. So again, it's a learning curve for all of us. Even if you've been there a while, you learn so much every year. So that's part of that, getting the process rolling quickly and being efficient. And worked hard at that, trying to get that, and trying to bring all new members along. Because
you actually attended the training.
Oh yeah, I sat through every minute of it and tried to add to that, and I'm continuing kind of some ongoing training. And I think we just don't have enough time for people to sit and think, well, I'm going to watch this for a year or two. And we have the youngest House maybe in Wyoming's history, and I think we have 4 in our 20s and 8 in our 30s. And when I was elected, it was considered the youngest because we had 3 in our 30s. Jeez. And so we're really young, which I think will serve the state really well. And but it's complete teamwork. It really is.
I want to push back just gently a little bit in that you often hear that in order to attract young people, you have to also have some amenities that they want today that would be different from what you and I were looking for when we were bringing our family to Wyoming. Those amenities might be more urban-centered, so to speak. Sure. So can Wyoming compete in the long term with that, recognizing that the needs and wants of recent college graduates might be different than what you and I were looking for years ago?
I think so. I think, and I think we have some of those urban spots, and they're going to continue to grow, I think, in Wyoming. But also, I think our small towns really have a certain kind of lure that of their own, and I think we have some wonderful places where, and there's people that want that as well, and I think we have those advantages, I think, and around this state, and so. I don't disagree with what you said, but I think we're cognizant of that. But I think the number one thing for families too is to have a great education system. We've done that in this state. I think there's a lot of local economic development things that are really are doing those amenity type things in our towns, and I think as a state level now we're trying to pull this all together as well to really add value to our minerals, to all these value added things, and really to embrace these opportunities out there. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of movement going on, and every state is involved in this, and everybody wants to kind of develop. And I think Wyoming has some unique advantages that we want to use.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm curious. There is a lot of pressure on education right now, and that's your profession.
Sure.
Would you hop back in the profession today if knowing what you know now, with the pressures and what it means to be an educator? Is that something you would still do and recommend to others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's different, and you wanna. I guess if you love your job, you probably never work a day in your life. We've all heard that, and I think to work with young people, I think, is a tremendous blessing. They probably keep you young, and they keep you. I just think it's such a thing, and it's just really a blessing. So absolutely, I think Wyoming is will be the greatest state to teach in. I think the support for our schools and our small schools and all throughout our state, I think, has really been unmatched. And I think the legislature's done a great job through our people, representing our people, and so we don't want to apologize for that. I mean, the expectations are higher. You know, the requirements are higher. All of that is ramped up, but you know, our kids are smarter than ever. We got the smartest kids we've ever had in our history. Our graduation rate is at the highest it's ever been in our state's history. Our scores are above the net. All those things all of this is moving in the right direction, and boy, I think that's something we can really be proud of. And so I'm just honored to have been able to do it. I mean, it's been my life's work, but it's really been a blessing. I mean, it's really, it's given me certainly a ton, and so I'm really grateful.
Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to visit with you.
Yeah,
Thanks
my
for joining
pleasure.
us on
Thank
this
you.
Capital Outlook profile.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Speaker Harshman, how is the House from your perspective? We're almost all the way through this general session. How are things going?
Well, I just really well, I'll say that. I mean, and I'm just really proud of the 60 House members that I've had the privilege to work with and lead, and I appreciate their trust in me. And I tell you, I think it's a process, you know, where everybody learning the process and the decorum, those mechanical pieces of it, but it's also a process of learning the feel, the floor. And you know, I think our founders understood how debate works and how the wisdom of the group works, and you have to kind of submit yourself to that. And I think but I really like the way we're treating one another, and I like how hard we're working. I've never seen House bills work this hard. I mean, we're getting criticized by our counterparts that we're too slow or we're killing too many bills, but I tell you, we're reading bills and working bills like crazy. And so real credit to our House members. That's what they're here to do. And so I'm really, really, really pleased and really proud of this group, the 64th.
Going to make it to the finish line with education issues at least begin to be attacked and budget issues solved?
I hope so. You know, I think the deal in the House, all the tough issues have to start in the House, from taxes to, you know, from the gun bills to the life and abortion bills. All those things seem to start in the House. You don't see those as Senate files. And so we've debated all those hard. Committees have worked very hard at them. And but I will say this, I think we're passionate about, you know, we're not going to bring the state to its knees. We're not. I mean, you can cut too much. And you try to find that sweet spot. I know it's easy sitting maybe out and you say, well, just cut it. Well, it's not that easy, because budgets are people, and the way they affect people and the services. And these services really are for some very vulnerable people. And I think that piece, I think education, I mean, do we think it should continue to be a fundamental right, like the freedom of speech and freedom to worship and those things? Well, the House believes that, and we're going to fight for that. And so, you know, we're not going to accept something that's half bad. We're interested in doing something good. And so I'm not compromising for half bad.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure. Thanks again for sitting down with us during this session. Our thoughts now will turn to two freshman members of the House, Representative McGuire and Representative Garreau. They're next. Stay with us on Capital Outlook. And we're pleased again to be joined in our weekly segment with new legislators here in Capital Outlook. Representative Joe McGuire, welcome to Capital Outlook, and Representative Mike Garreau, welcome. Mike, you're from Jackson.
Yes, sir.
And Representative McGuire, you're from Casper.
Yes.
Welcome to you both. Each of you have now been through most of this 40-day session, and I'm curious for each of you, what has been the biggest challenge for you in either pushing your own bills and goals forward, or in understanding other bills and issues that have come before the House? Representative McGuire, let me start with you.
The budget, understanding the budget, and there's a lot of moving parts to the budget, so trying to get a good understanding of that has been the biggest challenge for me.
And it's sure been rolling right now with the budget is in a conference committee, and the House has its position and the Senate has its position, and it's something that we've talked about in detail earlier in this show. Representative?
I think, along with the budget, the school finance bill, I think has been the biggest challenge for me, and just getting into the flow of the legislative process itself. But this education bill too has been a lot of discussion, a lot of communication from home, and it's been very interesting. And I think the bill that the House came out with, Bill 236, while not perfect in many ways, is a very good bill.
Let's talk about that for just a minute. It had a half-cent sales tax in it as it moved over to the Senate. That's now since been removed. There is no revenue in that bill as it stands today. What were your thoughts on whether that bill should include a revenue component now? Either of you.
Well, I was glad that when it went to the Senate, it had a revenue component in it. I'm a pretty conservative guy. I'm opposed to any new taxes. However, I think that we as a state, the people of the state, have to have that conversation. We have a problem right now that the majority of our revenue come from minerals, and we've just had a major downturn in our revenue, and at some point we're going to have some serious discussions about revenue.
Are both of your constituents telling you that now's not the time, or is the tide starting to change just a little bit on whether or not this is the time for these serious discussions? Representative Guru?
Well, I think that it is, and I think we're hearing from home that education is very important, and it's important to parents, it's important to the teachers, it's important to the children of Wyoming that we provide an adequate education. And so, while there are cuts to be made, I think a taxing component, and the one that we put in actually was very, very, it was at least 3 years out that it would even be contemplated if we spent down our reserves to a very low level, which frankly I doubted that would happen. I too agree with Representative McGuire. I'm very conservative when it comes to tax increases, but I think it was something that needs to just stimulate that conversation to try to generate different sources of revenue that education needs.
You come from different parts of the state, Jackson and Casper. Democrat and Republican here at this table. What are folks in central Wyoming telling you about the tax issue? It's a difficult proposition in Wyoming.
Well, it is. And most of the people that in my district, they have a very realistic view of the state, and they understand where the majority of our revenue is coming from. And certainly they want to make sure that we're not wasting money. But everybody that I've spoken to agrees that education is a top priority for the state. It has been. The past legislative bodies have proven that. I mean, if you take the District of Columbia out of the equation, because they're federal funds, right now we're number 5 in the country. A little rural state like Wyoming is number 5 in the country for how much we spend per student. So I don't think anybody can argue that past legislative bodies have made education an absolute top priority.
Each of you, when you decided to run for election and when you sought appointment, had issues that you were concerned about, goals perhaps. What were those, and have you been able to impact any progress on those goals in this first session?
Well, I don't know how successful I've been so far. We've definitely tried to advance some of these issues like education, and I've worked hard to do that. What I found is the legislative process is slow, arduous, difficult, and it's set up that way on purpose. So it's hard to measure and quantify success. I think we'll see as we get to the end of this session as far as what my constituents sent me down to do. I think we're working towards those goals, and I'm working towards them every day.
Representative McGuire?
My goals were maybe modest. My main goal was to take every piece of legislation and try to understand it as completely as I could, and vote in a good manner that represented the district. So that was my first goal.
How have you accomplished that? Because there is a lot to learn and see when you, for instance, get bills that you've originated in the House, and now you're getting bills that originated in the Senate that you haven't seen before. How do you digest? How do you get through?
I've trained myself not to sleep very much. It's a lot of work. And just one other note, I would say that I was really impressed by our citizen legislature and how serious everybody really is down here. I mean, the people are here trying to do the absolute best that they can, and the people back home should really understand that the people down here are working very hard.
One of the things I've asked senators and House members alike is, you had a 4-day holiday just a couple days ago, and does it seem already like it was weeks ago with just the work that you've done in the last couple days? You both share committee assignments as well. You both are on the Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee, as well as the House Labor, Health, and Social Services Committee. What are your goals in serving on those committees? Why are you on those committees? Representative Guru, you first.
Well, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources actually was a choice, a conscious choice that I made, given my Teton County district. Those issues, a lot of the issues that we take up there are important to my constituents. As I found, though, the interesting thing is that Labor and Health, a committee, frankly, that was not my first choice, has been also a committee that deals heavily with my constituents. And actually have gotten more contact from home on some of the issues we're dealing with there. Representative McGuire and I dealing with tough issues like Title 25 commitments, issues of health care, issues of, a lot of budget issues that are kind of wrapped around what we're talking about. And those issues are really kitchen table issues that families in my district are dealing with every day.
Representative McGuire, how about you?
I agree, and the committees were sort of assigned to me, so I'm very fortunate, and they're both very good committees.
Each of you will now, or perhaps you haven't already, but you will very soon in a committee meeting that you're going to in just a few minutes start contemplating interim work. What are your goals? What have you decided in your mind that is something that you really want to see this legislature work on in the interim as it approaches its upcoming budget session next year? Representative McGuire or Representative Guru, either one?
Well, it's my hope that, and while it may not be a committee that I serve on, we desperately need to work on our whole tax base. And to me, it's not a Republican-Democrat problem. It's not even a problem between the legislature and the governor, or even the House against the Senate. To me, it's a yesterday versus a tomorrow problem. We're rooted in a system today that is based on a history that is long and hallowed in our state. Unfortunately, I think we need to start looking towards tomorrow, towards expanding our business base and expanding our tax base.
So you're concerned about the amount, the ratio of mineral to non-mineral industry and the revenue they provide to the state of Wyoming.
The minerals industry has been good to Wyoming, and it will continue to be a major source of our revenue picture. But we have to start looking at tomorrow. We have to start looking at the future.
Representative McGuire, how about you? Interim topics that are on top of your mind.
Well, for the committees that we serve on, there's a big stack that's growing, and I don't have anything in particular that's sticking out to me. We're going to consider all of the items that have been brought forth and try to concentrate on ones that are the most important and that we can do something about in the interim. So.
Complete this sentence for me. To date, my toughest vote has been, Representative McGuire, you can go first.
Okay. I don't have one that just pops to mind, but I would say that I've tried to follow, and in fact, the speakers that came in first of the week mentioned, they talked about Abraham Lincoln. I've read a lot with him, and his proposition was that every potential law has some good and some not so good in it. And I've tried to measure that out and cast a vote according to both the platforms and resolutions of the Republican Party, as well as the people that I'm representing. So I don't have one that just pops out. I try to approach each one the same way.
Representative Guru, how about you?
The budget. There was as you know, Representative McGuire was just saying, that, you know, there's good and bad in each bill. There was a lot in that bill that I thought was lacking. But at the end of the day, I felt that it was a budget that I could support, even though, well, like I say, there were parts I didn't like. But most importantly, I think it would be the bigger crime, the bigger failure by us as legislators if we leave town without passing, you know, by any, or at least an interim budget that we need to do, plus an education bill. It's my fervent hope that we do so. But so far, that was the toughest vote.
Talked about that earlier today. Do you think that's a possibility as we're sitting here? We're Wednesday evening here in Cheyenne. The session's scheduled to end a week from Friday. Is it a possibility in your eyes? And we've asked the other members here that have visited with us today the same question. Do you think it's possible that we're going to leave without a passed supplemental budget?
I'm eternally optimistic.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm very optimistic. I think that we'll get a budget.
Briefly, we have about a minute left. You did get to see many former presidents and many former speakers last week, and it was a wonderful event. What did you take from that as you got to hear many of those folks address your body?
Oh, for me, it was terrific. It was a lot of folks that I've been, you know, seeing down here. As I was a town councilman and a county commissioner, and would be down here lobbying for years, and to see the past speakers and just remember the times that I spent down here while they were in that chair, and now actually to be here myself. Actually, it was very, very humbling, and very exciting. And it was exciting to see them.
Representative McGuire?
Agreed, and I think it's important, again, our citizen legislature. People come down here, they serve, and then they step back and they let somebody else take the mantle for a while. And the people who have been speakers and presidents, you see them in the Home Depot or wherever, and that's great. That's a big difference between our state with long streets and other places where people go to the Capitol and you never see them again.
I'm sure that was a wonderful event, though, for both of you, truly. Thank you both for joining us on Capital Outlook. We'll look forward to following your careers and as you return next year to serve in the budget session. And that's a wrap for Week 7 of Capital Outlook. Next week, we'll be joined in our final week by Governor Matt Mead. He'll reflect on the session, the ups and the downs. We'll also visit with Superintendent Jillian Balow. She'll reflect on the work that this body has done relative to the issue of education. There is still a lot of work to do in these final days, and we'll visit with the superintendent next week on her reflections on what has been done. And we'll also conclude with a visit again with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature, the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman, and the President of the Senate, Eli Bebout. Until next week, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.